Hey everybody, how's it going? Andrew here with a quick reminder about our Indie Game Movement Masterclass series. If you missed it, I just highly recommend that you check it out. It was episodes 375 to 377 because we went deep on some of the most critical parts of game development, like how to hook and engage players through candid discussions and practical strategies with our guest, Patrick Rose. Now, if you listened to those episodes and found them helpful, it's important to know that those conversations were inspired by our guest's full course, How to Create Irresistible Games, which takes things even deeper. And as a listener, you can still grab an exclusive discount if you decide to purchase the course. And honestly, it's a win win because you'll be investing in yourself and supporting the podcast at the same time as we get an affiliate commission. And one more thing, if you missed out on the Masterclass Series Premier Special discount, don't fret because as an IGM listener, you can still take advantage of our exclusive forever discount. So if you're ready to take action and dive into the course, just make sure to use the code IGM to take advantage of your exclusive discount. And to do that, just find the link in the show notes of this episode wherever you're listening. So thanks again. And as always, appreciate you guys. Now let's get right back to the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'll be your host today, and we're going to be talking about mastering value perception for publishers and players. So, standing out in the indie game market requires more than a great concept. It demands mastering value perception. So, in this episode, we're going to reveal how developers can increase their game's perceived value for publishers and players alike. We're going to learn how key value drivers can be used to amplify pitches and inform price strategies for long-term revenue and player trust. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Bobby Wertheim with us today. Bobby, how is it going? And thanks for being with us today. It's great to have you, man.
I'm loving the fact I'm here. Thank you for having me. Like, feeling good, really excited. Hopefully I can share a couple of tidbits that people can take away from this session. It should be good fun.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm positive you will. And we'll probably have so many things we're going to be talking about, tips, insights galore. But first, folks, Bobby is the founder of Condo Factory. And, real quick, what is Condo Factory? Is because I know this is, I believe it's something relatively new or whatever, but what's going on? What's Condo Factory? How is it helping people out in the industry?
Yeah, so Condo Factory is a company I founded May last year. So it's relatively new. Right now it's a team of 5 people. So it's a small team. And between us, we've got 75 years games industry experience. So while it's a small team, it's like an elite force. It's the Avengers of publishing in games. And we've got a lot of knowledge on, in terms of how to publish PC console games, some mobile knowledge, but really our focus is PC console, premium games. And at the moment, we're acting as a team of consultants and helping out the industry where we can across various disciplines like marketing, biz dev, blah, blah, blah. But our dream one day is to turn Condo Factory into a publisher itself. So, watch this space.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's like, you know what? Getting this extra help and assistance, I think, makes all the difference. And, you couldn't ask, there's lots out there, but in terms of Bob, you couldn't ask for a better source. And why? Not just because of the makeup of the team, but also, just his experience too. He's previously worked at Curve Games. He was the VP of partnerships, also, a partner at Nocturne Games. He was at Sega for 10 years and doing everything from help securing publishing deals for 7+ studios this year, in fact, in 2024, but, just held workshops on pitching best practices. You're credited in over 60+ games, and you evaluated over I almost said 200, 20,000 game pitches, but man, that is still quite a bit. And you're just, you're an endorsed champion of indie games, obviously with funding and publishing, and a mentor for Sofu. And I'd love to hear about what that is, because I think that's an interesting thing that you're doing there too.
Yeah. So SOFU is Japan's first government-backed accelerator program. And while Japan has been a powerhouse for the games industry, right? Historically, Japan's really led the way, paved the way. I, it, and you'd think they would have a vibrant indie development community because of its kind of heritage and track record. It really doesn't. It's not as vibrant as, say, Western Europe or North or even South America's. But with this kind of SOFU program, the government in Japan, the Ministry of Culture, is trying to really kind of accelerate that growth, right? And make sure that Japan does have a really vibrant indie development community. Because when I say that, I'm specifically talking about the PC console side of indie dev, not necessarily mobile. Because on the mobile side, Japan is very, very vibrant. It's really strong. On the PC console traditional premium game side, not so much. And the SOFU program is a program that is helping kind of accelerate that growth on that side of the games sector. And I'm currently mentoring 3 studios through that program, pro bono. But, it's really nice to be able to give back and help these teams deliver success.
Awesome. I love hearing that, especially because, we've covered this before in the podcast too, where we have these, areas that don't have either right representation, or it's just not really, prominent. The industry isn't prominent in these little areas and pockets and stuff. So anywhere to, showcase and call out to these types of organizations or people making changes in these areas that don't have the same resources and everything else is always great to hear. So thank you for sharing more about that too. And I mean, in addition to this, I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen him in some capacity before, but Bobby has even been on lots of speaking events and in sessions, like even recently game days in 2024 on funding strategies, big surprise, because that's kind of what we're here talking about to an extent, but also like, speaker, panelist, judge at events like Reboot, GDC, DevCon, Big. I mean, it goes on. Quite a bit of things. So again, we're just happy to have you here, and man, and sharing all that experience and everything. But in light of that, man, you're busy, but when you're not busy, what are you doing to unplug in your spare time to, relax and unwind a bit?
Yes, I've spent a fair amount of my career living out of a suitcase, basically going to all these conferences and stuff. And then it's like, all right, my life becomes the travel, the eating, the drinking, the networking, right? But when I'm at home, I'd say like right now, the thing that I'm really into right now is a Japanese martial art called Shorinji Kempo, which I started in September. So, and I just got graded yellow belt. So I'm like, I'm at the very beginning of my journey with this martial art, but I'm loving it. It's really, really nice. It's good for like mental health, physical health, having something consistent in your life. And yeah, just like self-improvement and challenge, right? It's really nice. And then I also dabble around with remote control cars and, buy hop-up parts and upgrade them and take them to the circuit to run them around. And I go to the movies. I try and, have a varied life. I've got two children, one that's a teenager, one that's nearing becoming a teenager. So that keeps me busy too. But yeah, that's my kind of like what I do in my spare time, I guess.
I absolutely love it. And such a great diversity there. I mean, between the martial arts and RC cars. Yeah, man, I don't know. You're giving me some ideas for maybe some future hobbies, but we'll see. All good stuff. Well, thank you, Bobby. But before we go into the heart of our conversation, we want to get to know you a little bit more. And to do that, what we're going to do is have you go through the Q-Box round, which is a few random questions I prepared here for Bobby today. So, Bobby, are you ready for the Q-Box round?
Let's go. Is this like quick fire round? It sounds like it's a quick fire round.
Love it. All right. So first is, what advice would you give to someone else that's just starting out?
Okay. So it depends what you're doing, to be honest. But in my case, if I talk about me, I was an antique dealer before I joined the games industry. And I was running 3 shops in London that, focused on Japanese antiques. And from that, I thought, oh, I want to go into the games industry. And the role that I wanted to go for was to be a producer. I didn't even know what a producer was in games. I didn't even know what an alpha stage or beta stage of a game was. I had no technical knowledge whatsoever. I mean, I was an antique dealer, right? That's far removed from game development and publishing. But I was like, oh, but I can manage projects, I can manage programs. Surely I can, manage quality and budgets and schedules. But when I went looking for the roles, it became very apparent I did not have the skill set or the knowledge, right? Specifically the knowledge. And so people who I spoke to, over the course of that kind of like interviews and that kind of journey of trying to hunt for a producer role, it became like some people recommended, oh, maybe you could go into QA and start there, use that as your stepping stone, and then maybe that can then lead into going into production and becoming a producer. And that's exactly what I did. I became a QA functionality QA tester. I kind of learned the very end of the value chain of publishing in a way, right? Because QA comes right at the end, the polishing stage. Got to know that, got to know how things worked within PlayStation. And then from then on, I moved to Sega to become an associate producer. And then, and then here we are. But so it depends what you're going for, like how you should do it. Like if you're doing like a content-based role where you're creating lovely art assets or audio, then it's all about building out your portfolio. If you're going for more of a commercial role, like maybe business development or something outwards facing, then maybe you need to do a lot more networking and just get to know people, build that trust. But whatever you're going for, I think you need to be slightly flexible, especially in this environment, because everyone's looking for a role in the games industry right now with all of these layoffs that's happening. So I think you need to be mindful of that and really try and find a way of building up your experience and therefore credibility, and really kind of, have your moment of chest beating, like King Kong, and be like, I am really good at this. I've got this. I can add value to your team. And maybe you have to be a bit flexible, right? Like maybe like I was when I first started, potentially, who knows?
Yeah, no, awesome stuff right there. I mean, just flexible, and being that is very important. So definitely some good stuff there. All right, next, what's the most common mistake you see companies make in the industry with their businesses?
I think we're seeing the outcome of it right now with all of these layoffs, and that is happening across the board with really big, humongous companies, as well as the smaller ones, who unfortunately are completely going out of business rather than suffering just layoffs. I say just layoffs like it's no worse, but it's quite tragic. And I think a lot of them, this has happened because they've overstretched, and that's the thing that they seem to have in common, right? They've overexposed themselves. The nature of the environment has changed within the games industry, where money's a lot more expensive. It's a lot more rarer to come by. There's a lot more games that you're going up against now. So, the kind of bets that people were making wasn't appropriate for the environment that we find ourselves in today. And so I think people weren't cautious enough. Maybe they were looking to grow aggressively and quickly, and they're having to pay the price for it. And I think that's the common mistake we're seeing that's happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you see the projections, they're all going up, and you're trying to account for them, but necessarily not accounting for what lies after the fact. And then if anything recedes, which obviously has been happening, and there lies the error, I guess. And sometimes they say hindsight's 2020, but it's not to say that you can't also potentially account for such things. And it's a ongoing thing that hopefully we're learning as we move forward. And I speak wholeheartedly as an industry.
Completely. And sometimes you have to play not to lose rather than playing to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think people were too much on the offensive and they weren't on the defensive enough.
Yep. Because I don't know, the logic of the best defense or is a strong offense doesn't necessarily always work.
Yeah, not when everyone's doing it, right?
Exactly. Yep. All right, cool. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show, is what game are you playing now?
So I'm a BAFTA member, which means I have to, as part of that, I have to kind of take part in the voting of all the games that go into BAFTA, and the first round just closed. So I had to play across all these different categories of games. So there's like a plethora of games that I've been playing recently. but like all these games that were nominated effectively, right? But that were in the long list. But the games that I've got downloaded that I've been playing in my own time are, you'll probably notice a pattern here.
Okay.
But right now, the kind of like the games that I've just downloaded that I'm playing are games like Frostpunk 2, Preserve, that's a bit like Dorf Romantic or Islands, Shapes 2. There's a lot of twos. Shapes
Yes.
2, Frostpunk 2. And there was another one that I downloaded that I haven't got around yet. Oh yeah, that's it. Factorio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they're all like tinkering, kind of
Yes.
play at your own pace, make a lovely sort of little world of mine. So I guess I'm very much looking for healing from games and escapism rather than high intensity, right, in my own time right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are great games to do that with, especially.
Mm.
And get you in the that Zen zone. I know that's a characteristic that people call out a lot to with those games. So cool. Definitely a good lineup there, and glad you're enjoying them. Well, thank you so much, Bobby, for letting us dive in, get to know you a little bit more in the Q-Box round. But now, folks, we are going to get straight to our conversation, which I shared in the intro, which is, mastering value perception for publishers and players. And these are big things because, perception, how you're perceived, what is the value, and all these other factors is so important in what you're doing, especially in your business. So to kick things off, Bobby, I'm curious, in your experience, why is it so important for developers to understand, the balance between value perception and strategic planning? Especially as it relates to game publishing. What is that like, and why is it important?
It's a big decision, I think, you have to make as a team that's delivering content to a really engaged community. Like, how do you want to engage with the community, and how do you want to brand yourselves? How do you want to position yourself in the world? Like, if we take, and I don't think there's one right answer, but I think there's a spectrum of how people operate in the industry today. So while I much prefer talking about indie games, I'll take some really big games as examples. So on one hand, you have games like Baldur's Gate 3, who are like huge amount of content, massive feature set, massive game, like just an absolute Goliath of a game, which you buy, you pay for, and then you basically don't have to spend money again, right? There's no in-game monetization, and the game is being updated constantly. And that from a team perspective that's working on the game, they're kind of like continuing to work on the game to provide content to an already released game that they're not monetizing further to continue to please the people that have purchased the game, so they get even more value for money from what is already a crazy value for money game. And then on top of that, they're doing it so that they can attract new users in as well, right? So, and it becomes an evergreen game eventually, where people are just like, this is one of the best games you should ever buy because it's just such good value for money. It's so good quality, and it's so huge, and there's so many things, and just across all spectrums, it's just an awesome game. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got games that are, games as a service games that potentially it's free to download, and there's, season passes and in-game monetization that you have to purchase. So the initial download at launch, when it first became public, may be a way small game compared to, like, a nucleus of a game compared to, say, something like Baldur's Gate 3. But over time, it builds to become an absolutely giant game, whether that be games like Fortnite or whatever else, right? Valorant, take your pick. But like they're games that at first, maybe they're not so huge, but they build over time. And as it goes along that journey, maybe there's a different perception by the users in terms of how they feel with the purchase of that game, how they feel as they're interacting with the game. And I think as a developer, you have to make a decision on where along that spectrum does it work for me, for my team, for my game, for my audience, and how do I want to work with that, right? And there's different ways of games as a service or live service games. Like if you look at, say, for example, a completely different franchise like Football Manager, published by Sega, where I was for 10.5 years. So Football Manager is a game that it comes out once a year, and it's just every year there's a new Football Manager coming out, and in between there'll be some patches, but really you're buying the game, and then you're going to continue to play that game for a year, and then next year you'll buy the new one, right? And it's like, how is that different to say a live service game? Well, maybe the business model looks different, but ultimately the team that's working on the game are working on the game all year round, and they have no intention of stopping working on the game. It's a very, very successful, really addictive, great game. It's a soccer game, right? But a management game. And it's probably the best one out there in terms of the scope of and feature set of the game is unbelievable. It's unparalleled. It's huge. But like, it's like, how do you want to position yourself? And you know, that's part of the kind of strategic planning that leads to the value perception, right?
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that because it sounds like too that and what you were just mentioning a few moments ago, it really comes down to not necessarily making a call on either or whatever, but but to understand the importance, it comes down to like posing questions in terms of like, does this align with our vision? Does this align with, the values and focuses that we have as a team? And I'm sure that can get even into deeper stuff like what is our strengths? Do we have a path of progression to learn to iterate and build upon these things? Like so many things are happening here. And it sounds great because I think sometimes, we look at things with it's either this or that. And we may make those calls without posing those questions and the validity of them and understanding what that is to really give us a proper direction. And then in that process, understanding that balance. And maybe it's like weighted heavily on one end and then you gear towards another as you move forward. It's really about, it's not necessarily about I guess the end point or the destination. It's kind of about that journey too.
Totally. Like, it's not, like you say, it's not a binary decision. It's you want to place yourself somewhere on the spectrum, right? As you set your team out to deliver this experience and bring it out into the world as a game. And maybe what you initially set yourselves out of, this is our intent, this is what works for us, actually changes over time and it evolves, right? And that's fine too. But I think making sure you understand what the major players are doing, or what your closest neighbors are doing in terms of your competitors, and understanding, well, where do I want to own? Where do we belong, right? Where do we want to sit? Like, there's different ways you kind of look at this, but I think you do have to ask yourself that question and go, right, well, this is right for us. Really understand why it's right for us, you, the team, and then, really kind of set your store out and really go for it.
Awesome. All right. Well, in light of that, I want to kind of start diving in a little bit more about, just value perception in general, especially when it comes to, pitching, because it's kind of a different animal. And, when we're talking about, really indicating or conveying what is this value here, one of the biggest and I think most challenging areas that everybody has is pitching. I know we're focusing on, publishers a bit here today, but that also applies to anybody you're pitching to, whether it's your audience and players and things like that. But on the publisher side, I'm just curious, like, how do publishers, typically assess the value of a game during a pitch? Yeah, because I'm sure there's lots of things that they're looking for, but like, I guess, what are some key things that they're looking for that overall value? And I'm sure this could change across the board, but what are some main things that you'd call out to?
Okay, so I'll answer your question directly at the end of a meandering answer, if that's all right.
Let's do it.
When publishers are assessing pitches, they typically have multiple kind of gates or evaluation funnel, as I like to call it. And there's several steps in that evaluation funnel. And the very first step in that funnel is, before the pitch has even been reached, has been assessed by the publisher. The publisher has decided, this is our thesis. This is our content strategy. We're going for these kind of games. So before you've even pitched to a publisher, the publisher's already kind of made up their mind in terms of what they're going for. Maybe it's the budget range that they're investing in. Maybe it's the platforms they're going for. Maybe it's the price point of the games that they're going for. Maybe it's the genre of games they're going for, the type of experiences that they're going for, right? There's different like ways that they can slice it, like the age range, what kind of demographic they're gunning for. Maybe it's to fit their existing portfolio. So there's different things that drive what a publisher's looking for. So then before you've even pitched to them, there's that first thing, right? And so let's say then you pitch to a publisher that you are a match, that you are pitching to a publisher that's looking for exactly what you're delivering or what your vision is to deliver. Then the first step is it really from engagement, that first contact is the game scout, whoever's acting as the game scout for the publisher, is looking to just match that. Actually, this is a big picture view. It aligns with our strategy, with our publishing content strategy. It fits, right? And it excites me. In some way, they're looking to be excited. Like, earlier you mentioned that I've evaluated over 20,000 pitches. To be honest, I stopped counting at 20,000. It's probably closer to like 30,000 pitches now. I've seen a lot of pitches. And even today, there's pitches that I get really, really excited by. And I love it when I come across those pitches, right? And it's like, that's like secondary to, does it match what my corporation, my team, my company is going for? Like, obviously that's the priority. But if I also get excited by it, then it's just like, yeah, I'm now super in. I'm really excited. I'm going to go and champion and socialize this game in-house. Then it becomes more scientific after that point, right? You start to play the build, the prototype. You make sure it's like proving out the key things that the team were looking to prove out. You start doing a revenue forecast of the game to see how big the potential size of the revenue of this game is. And, you do the due diligence and on you go through the kind of evaluation funnel. But like, so when you say, how do publishers typically assess the value of a game during a pitch? It depends where you are in that funnel in terms of how and what they're putting the value on. But ultimately, they're looking at things like, where's the team based? Because depending on where the team is based, I mean, if you're based in North America, your average man-month rate, your average cost per person per month would be wildly different to, say, someone in, I don't know, like the Philippines or something, right? Where the cost of living is very, very different. And maybe the level of expectation that you would have on a team that you're paying maybe top dollar for because of where they're based. Maybe they've also got a track record of working on some great games prior to working on that current game that they're pitching for, versus a team that maybe is, they're working on their debut game, but maybe they're based in a geographically, kind of like strategic location where maybe actually there's great talent pool coming out of there, but actually the cost tends to be a lot lower. So how you value a pitch, you can look at it from that lens. You can also look at it from the lens of, well, we forecasted the revenue for the game and it's like crazy amazing. This game is going to make so much money. Because you compare it against benchmarks and you look at what the benchmarks have done. And then some games, depending on the genre, have a really high success rate, and the kind of opportunity, the amount of revenue you can achieve is really high. Conversely, on the other side of the spectrum, maybe you've got games that are in a genre where the success rate is relatively low because it's such a red ocean with so many games coming out in that category. And actually the ceiling of what those games can achieve is relatively low as well. So there's like different ways to kind of assess, the cost or the revenue that the game might bring in.
Mm. Yeah, no, and thank you for providing that breakdown, because I think sometimes what happens is we don't always put ourselves in the shoes of the publishers to understand what are they looking for, what gets them excited, what is their process and how they do things. So having this understanding is really important, and also leads into my next question in terms of, from everything that you just laid out, what steps can developers take to ensure their game is perceived as having high value? Because let's face it, you provided some examples there where some people are probably thinking, oh, well, maybe I'm not in that strategic location or don't fit that strategic element that completely aligns with this publisher's process. So in moments like that and whatnot, what are the ways that they can ensure that their game, and however, whatever's within their means and what they have control of, is perceived as having high value?
Yeah, so like, it's a great question. And it might be another long-winded answer, but there's what I call the ultimate game pitch guide that I've kind of laid out as a template for people in the past, and definitely following that formula helps. And if I was to break down and highlight some of the key points of that, is you should definitely relay how much has gone into this project already in terms of time and money, right? Because then the publisher knows, oh my God, you've already put in like a year or a year and a half's work into this. Crazy, right? Like, that's so much work you've put into this already. So now we're just like almost like a bridge fund at that point. Now you've fully finished pre-production, and now you've de-risked the project. And really, for every dollar spent on a game, the dollars you spend at the beginning and the dollars you spend at the end have a different value, right?
Mm.
In terms of risk. The dollars you spend at the beginning is super high risk and therefore really expensive versus the dollars you spend at the end. So if you've already spent quite a bit of time and money on a game, maybe you haven't actually spent real money on it, but you spent a lot of time on it, right? Like sweat equity, and you've gone through pre-production, and now it's like, hey, dude, now I just need to finish like production. I just need to provide content, all the features, all the stuff under is done. Like we've got like a great documentation, we've got a great like maybe vertical slice even. Then at that point, it already feels like for a publisher, you've de-risked it, you've brought the value to the table. If on top of that, you've announced a game and you've got wish lists on Steam, say for example, or you've got platform deals in place, that again brings up the value of the game. And if you're working in a category within the games market that's highly lucrative, then again, that will bring up the value of the game. And if you have crazy track record of, we've worked on these amazing games that have been super successful in the past, and guess what? The game we're making right now, there's a lot of learnings that we're taking from that past experience that's highly relevant to delivering success for this game. That will also add value, right? So talking about your track record, talking about how much time and money you've spent in the game, talking about what you've already proven and what is needed to come in the future, and what the market potential of the game is. Like, make sure you are the kind of subject matter expert. Be really knowledgeable about the market segment that you're working within. So know about your competitors, know about your neighbors, know about how well they've performed commercially and critically. Know about like what made those games special and how your game really has a purpose here to be amongst those competitors, right? So talking about those things can be really helpful. Sorry if I'm talking too much about this stuff, Andrew.
No, you're absolutely fine and great. I mean, I love those points, that you made and stuff. And it's like, the one that really stood out to me, and I think is such an important one. And one, I mean, this is just my personal experience, but from what I've seen from other people that are, making their games, whether it's some pitches or stuff, is really taking ownership and being that, subject matter expert. I think that's such a good point because all these other things are important. Yes, track record, and yes, I also feel, and agree with me or not, that people could probably be more confident in how they present themselves in those manners, even if they feel like they don't have quite as much experience as, oh, well, they worked in triple A's for X number of years and I don't have that. There's lots that you can do, but the subject matter expert I think is important. And man, I'm probably gonna butcher his name, but was it David Whale or Whale? You have geez, what is it? He just did We Farm Shadows. I think that game.
Okay.
And one of the things that he called out to in making that game in particular was he's done this with this whole process. He has a course that outlines these things too. But one of the things he did is like, I made sure basically I was a subject expert in the genre. I was making this game. I did all my research. I played a bunch of games. It's like he did anything and everything he possibly could in that segment and what he was making and just made the experience as good as that he could. He did invest tons of time, and I think it was over 200,000 before he really started pushing it or getting it out there. But again, everything that he did, just as an example, is basically you just summed up right here. And being that subject expert, and then when he launched, he got a huge amount of wish lists and everything else, and it just goes down to that process that you basically outlined here too. And it's not to say that it's unique to anyone in being able to do that, but I that's the one thing I wanted to call out. And sorry for going on a quick tangent here, but I think that's one of the coolest things and most important is that subject matter. And it has more impact than I think a lot of us realize, because sometimes, as I was kind of sharing before, I see it feels like they go through the motions. And it's not to say that that's intentional, but the way it's perceived or the way that it's conveyed is, oh, you might not have done as much as you could have to really be that expert and really convey it and really show that level of confidence to say, I am that person. And plus, on a publisher side, if you convey that, people are like, wow, this person really knows what they're talking about. Maybe it might not completely align with all these checklists I have, but you know what? Why don't we entertain this a little bit more, because there might be something here.
Exactly, right? That's totally it. And the thing is, the passion naturally comes across then, and the confidence as well naturally you're building confidence by knowing you are a subject matter expert. Conversely, like, let's say there's someone who's got amazing track record, AAA experience, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes publishers look at that and see it as a risk, actually, just so people know, just so people who don't have that experience don't feel too, I don't know, somehow inadequate, or, like they're lacking knowledge or skill because of that, right? So actually, most mega hits come out of nowhere, right? They don't come from those that have been at AAA and then gone indie all the time at all. Quite often, these kind of high profile ones, when they go indie, typically well, I wouldn't say typically, but most startups fail anyway, right? And it's no different for those who have been in those mega studios working on mega franchises. So just because you don't have that track record, don't feel insecure. But if you become like the kind of guru of that space, if you become super knowledgeable, and you should be, right? Because you're putting a lot at stake here. You're going to work on this game for maybe 2 years, maybe longer, right? So you might as well really become very good at what you're doing. And to do that, you should know your enemies. You should know your competitors. You should know your neighbors. And then when you're talking to people and you're pitching, it will come across. That knowledge really comes across during that conversation, because the conversation is not just a 20-minute conversation. It's quite often from pitch to signature of a contract with a publisher. It can take anything up to like 6 months on average, right?
Yeah.
So there's quite a few conversations that are going to happen, and it will come to light. So you might as well do your homework. Like I once had, well, not once, but quite a few times I've had people pitch stuff to me where they're very clearly not a subject matter expert. And it just, those pitches didn't get signed. Like, surprise, surprise, right? So it's like, I'm not saying you need to have an encyclopedic knowledge of all games, but at least be really up to date on the kind of area that you're working within.
Yeah. And, real quick, one thing you called out too, that goes right back to your cue box around question was, and not just so much of being flexible, but, building up your experience and credibility, because I think it's great that you shared that, sometimes, people who have like AAA experience is a risk. And one of the ways that an analogy that I thought of for that, as you were sharing that, it's like, people that are right out of college and be like, hey, look, I got this degree, I can get a job now. And a lot of, people in the job market or, employers that are hiring, okay, that's great, but what else, right? What's the experience you have? What's that credibility? Like, what things have you done on your own? Do you have any work? Most cases out of college, you don't have as much work, but how are you showing that? Like, how is the other experiences relate to this job that you're applying for? And it's no different. I mean, that's a pitch too. We're all talking about pitches here. And again, it goes back to that point you were making earlier.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, one more thing I want to talk about here too, this is getting kind of into a different area too, is like, elements and things like art style, gameplay mechanics, and obviously target audience. How are these factored into value perception too in these moments? Because sometimes it can seem a little subjective or maybe too dialed in or detailed and not as relevant. I mean, are they a big factor? Are these other things to be highly considerate of as well? Or could that, I mean, is it super important or not?
So the short answer is yes, it is super important. It is important. And I've been playing games all my life, like many who are in the games industry. And I consider myself a bit of a connoisseur of games, right? Like I love games, and if I'm going to play a game in my own time and I'm going to part way with my cash, I'm going to choose a game that I feel like I am getting value for money. And this is high value, right? I'm going to pick and I'm sure it's the same for anyone that picks up a game, really. But when I started scouting games and I was like, early on the journey of, all right, I'm going to scout for a game and decide which one to invest in and I think I was slightly obnoxious in a way, slightly arrogant, where I was looking at what is the long-term potential of this? Is it evergreen? Can it be franchised? Can it, does it have a core mechanic that's really something that's long-lasting, or something that you can really shout about, a USP, a key pillar for that game that could become an everlasting pillar, basically, right? And I wasn't so focused on, say, how the game looked, right? If it was very unique and compelling, I was like, the looks don't matter, right? Art style, who cares, right? That's not that important. That's coming from an antique dealer, by the way, where the look of something was very important. And then I quickly realized actually people do care about how distinct a game looks and how if it looks like it's high quality. It doesn't need to be high fidelity. It doesn't need to be,
Mm,
like using all the latest tech and being really expensive to deliver, but it needs to look relatively high quality for it to have that kind of curbside appeal for people to have a look on the store page or see a trailer in a showcase and go, you know what, that excites me. That I connect with that. I want to buy that game. When they don't really know that much about the game yet, because they're almost making decisions really, really quickly about whether they're going to purchase or not, right? So actually, art style does matter. To me, today, it matters more than it used to, say, 8 years ago, when I was early on in my journey of going out scouting for games. In terms of gameplay mechanics, super important. I mean, if you don't have something unique there, I mean, what do you have? Like, why would anyone give a damn, basically, right? What's the purpose? Why should this game even exist if it doesn't have anything unique? I think there are genre pieces. There are games that are not necessarily offering something entirely unique, but it's just doing something very well, right? And
mm,
therefore it does have a reason to exist. Or maybe it's telling a story, or maybe it has a certain ambience or setting or something that makes it unique. And maybe it's not mechanical, to go against what I just said, but generally speaking, I like to see unique mechanics. I think that reduces risk from everyone that's involved, because if you don't have something very unique, then it comes down to execution on how well you've delivered that piece of content, right? And therefore the risk is higher. Like, not everyone can deliver something that's in the top 1% or the top 0.1% even, where really there's true success. So to reduce risk, yeah, you should have really cool mechanics, right? That's not often seen or ever seen even. But then if you do something that's completely unique, that's never done by anyone, it's like, why hasn't anyone done this before? Is it because it's impossible? Is it really difficult to do? Is it because no one wants to engage with that? So there's other questions that arise from being innovative. So there's always like all these questions that one has to ask themselves, right? And maybe along the journey, if that is the case, if you're doing something that's completely different, then you can maybe do some market research to prove, no, there is a desire for this. And maybe you can do a prototype to prove, yes, we can deliver this mechanic. So you get rid of those risks, right? As you're going to pitch to a publisher, maybe. And then in terms of target audience, like this is a difficult one, because depending on the demographic you're going for, the type of game you should deliver and how you deliver it really changes. So let's say, when I was at Sega, I was at one point, I was in the production team and I was the producer on the Sonic series, right? On the Sonic franchise, working on Sonic the Hedgehog. And Sonic is a mass market game. It does have a core audience that's been with Sonic since the 90s, and they're grown-ups now and they love Sonic, and they always have. But really, the majority of the people who are buying Sonic are the parents and grandparents of children, right? So they're the people you're targeting, and they're the people you're making the game for. And conversely, if you're making a game that's like, I don't know, Balatro, very, very different game, right? It's based on poker. It feels like some people maybe would be concerned it's about gambling, when it's not really. But maybe some people would have that. So you wouldn't necessarily target the grandparents and the parents that are buying games for their children, right? You'd target someone completely different. So how you make the game and who you target and how you target them and what kind of features and scope you include in the game really changes depending on who you're targeting. So, and then the target group naturally has different values, right? Like there's the size of that market, the demographic, and the cost to acquire those users will be different. So yes, all of these things you've mentioned, Andrew, does matter.
awesome. And what I like about your responses too is just, diving deep into these different aspects, like, hey, gameplay mechanics, what makes them unique, or maybe more specifically, what differentiates them from the norm. And you gave so many different examples of, like, setting, or maybe another secondary element that adds into that core mechanic. I mean, there's any number of things that you can approach that. And then the audience, like really understanding and knowing what that core group has, and understanding the differences between different things and stuff. And perfect example with, Sega using Sonic, but lots of different thing. So it's like, yeah, these are all important, but why are they important? How are they important? And how are they important and applicable to you in your project? I think is what you're really calling out to and saying, hey, yes, they're important, but these are how they are important and why as it applies to you. Because at face value, yeah, of course they're apply, but what does that mean? Great examples and how we can dive in and understand what that means. So now I know we're coming on time, and but there's still a few other questions we want to address. I want to talk into a little bit more on the strategic planning side, and even like pricing and some elements as it relates to, let's say, self-publishing. And in particular, one thing I want to call out to, because I know this is subject, an important one for a lot of people and stuff. When it comes to pricing a game for self-publishing, what are some key factors that developers should prioritize? Because this is something I see happen time and time again that I don't think people put enough thought into. So what are these key factors that developers should prioritize when it comes to their pricing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andrew, man. It's really good. Yeah, I'll try and keep it short and snappy. But basically, I think what you need to do is, one, look at what your competitors are doing, because they're setting the trend, right? Like if someone's going to buy, I don't know, Uncharted, they're going to buy another game that's kind of similar. Maybe another game by Naughty Dog, right? Or maybe a completely different studio that's making that game, but something in the kind of third-person action-adventure sort of setting, right? Or segment. And so because of that natural crossover that happens, where users tend to go for something new but familiar, so you should expect, if they're going to buy my game, they've probably bought someone else's game that's kind of similar to my game in some way. So if your game is priced at, I don't know, $25 and all of your competitors are priced at $9.99, they're going to be like, whoa, dude, your game's like really expensive. So you have to look at your competitors. It's an obvious one, but you really should. And a great way to do that is, you could look at sites like Gamealytic, Game Discover Co. has their own backend stuff. You could look at VG Insights, or you could look at SteamDB, or there's like loads of sites where you can go to see data like that. So do your market research, understand what your competitors are doing. And then my second piece of advice is think about the life cycle of your game. Like if it's a Steam-focused game, for example, a premium PC game, it's going to be on Steam. That's going to be a main revenue driver. Over the course of its life, you're going to do pulsing, right, in terms of your pricing, doing discounting, promotions, bundles throughout the life cycle of your game. You're probably going to start at 10% off at, kind of like pre-order price, like promotion, maybe even 20%, 15% off. And as it goes through its life cycle, you pulse the price and you do deeper discounts, right? That's what everyone does on Steam that's just how Steam works. It's algorithmic. And you're going to get eyeballs on your game when you do discounts. So that's what people do. And because everyone's doing it, it's like, that's just how it is, unfortunately. Well, for good or bad, that's what's happening. And so let's say you price your game at $20, and the deepest discount you can do on Steam is 95% off, right? That I tend to see anyway. And the lowest price you can sell your game for on Steam is effectively $1. So if you're at $20, you can do a 95% off and sell your game for $1, right? That's right at the end of your life cycle. So say, for example, today I was just, because I'm always like hovering around on Steam, and I was looking at Steam today, and I noticed that Civ 6, right now you can buy it, I'm in the UK, you can buy it for £2.50, basically, which is crazy good price. I mean, it's such a good game. Everyone should buy it right now if they haven't bought it already. But they can do those deep discounts and still eke out decent revenue because they've originally priced it at quite a substantial price. Now, if you price a game at, say, $9.99, you can't really do 95% off, right? So it locks out some of the discounts that you can do. And the lower you set your price, like let's say you went $5, again, it locks out some of the deeper discounts that you can do later in the life cycle. And maybe you've got a bunch of people that have wishlisted your game who are like, oh, I'll buy it when it's 95% off. I'll buy it when it's 70% off. But if you've done such a low price point to go out of the gate with, maybe you can never hit that discount level and you can never convert those people, right? So you have to think about like, what is the right price in terms of for the game in my segment? And you have to think about what is the right price for the kind of, when you think about the life cycle of the game.
I love this, and I want to dive a little bit deeper here for a moment too, because and again, I'm just using your very simple example that you led in before, where it's like, hey, if you're doing some market analysis and say, hey, the price point for this game in the market's like $10, but you were thinking 25, right? That could be a really hard sell. But and maybe this isn't the best example, but for the sake of time, let's just say you decide you have a lot of justified reasons and you're getting enough indicators that you're communicating to players that they're like, yes, the I see the perceived value here, and there's actual like legitimate tangible value in this game because for whatever reason you're like extremely surpassing existing value because there is so much more content, there's so much replayability, so many other factors where players are like, you know what, it's a bit more, yes, sign me up. Now, again, I think 10 to 25 is a significant jump, so I would never probably recommend it in most cases. But like in those situations, so like, are there any way to kind of navigate that situation? Or I guess it really comes down to in the theoretical environment is if you are properly conveying that, if you're getting enough signals to warrant that price, then hey, I guess run with it. But otherwise, I guess it's still you're still going to be, regardless of how much you're pumping into it, to an extent at the mercy or within a little bit of a range of what that set value is within the market, correct?
Yeah, so like this comes down to like what the business people call pricing elasticity study, right? Where the lower your price is, maybe you attract a bigger audience, but conversely, your revenue might be lower because your pricing is lower, or maybe you price it higher, knowing less people are going to buy the game, but actually, will that result in more money in your pocket at the end of the day, right? And there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle between being super low price and super high price, and there's that sweet spot, and that's where you want to fall ultimately, where people feel like I'm getting value for money, I'm happy to part with my cash for this, and they'll hopefully really enjoy the experience and upvote your game and tell their friends you should buy this game because it's awesome, and it's and pricing doesn't even come into the conversation,
Yeah.
right? That's ultimately where you want to be. And if you have a game that you feel like warrants this really high price point, like more than double of the market average, then I would say, yeah, go for it. But you should be really certain about that before you do it, because it could be that everyone's like, oh, it's a ripoff, download. And then, unfortunately, all of your work is wasted. So I wouldn't be too greedy, but all right, so let's talk about how to go about it and how best to go about it. So like I would naturally, always, I recommend developers to engage with the community from as soon as possible. As soon as possible, start talking to the community, build a community from day one effectively. Don't wait and hide in a corner and come out like, ta-da, just before you release the game, but really talk to a community from day one. And along that journey, maybe you amass a community that you're regularly communicating with on Discord or wherever else, right? And you can engage with them and get them to do fan art and do competitions, or maybe you can also ask about what would be the right price for this game. I mean, that's not an unheard of thing that developers have done. Like many have done this and successfully, and you'd be quite surprised. Sometimes the community comes up with a pricing that they're like, no, this is the right price. Overwhelmingly, they say this is the right price, which is way higher than what was being discussed internally, right? Because they know what the value of the game is, and they're like, no, this is the right price. So if you have that kind of validation, then maybe that gives you more confidence to go out there at a slightly higher price point than the competition. If you don't do that and you're going completely blind, then I'd be worried. And if you're doing that on the basis of the scope of the game, like the amount of time that can be played in the game, I would be worried, because most players don't finish games. So for those players, it's just a really expensive experience, right? Because they haven't put in the time to get the value for money. So I'd rather developers went for this where it's very clear from the moment you boot the game up, it justifies that increased price point, rather than relying on the depth and length of the game, right? Because not all players will be able to see that depth or length of the game. And that could be because of a feature set. Maybe it's in that space, no one's done multiplayer before, but you're doing it for the first time. Or maybe in that space, no one has done it in full 3D, amazing graphic, ray tracing, rah, rah, rah. And, it's only ever been 2D pixel art or something. So now, like, there's clearly, an increased value that you're bringing to the table. So I think it needs to be looked at from multiple angles before you go out there.
I absolutely love that one that you just said. Like, two things that I love that you just said. One was, what does the value mean for players? And then elaborating on that further, meaning it's not just, hey, you could pump with so much content, but let's say if you're putting in content for the sake of putting content, that's not really going to translate to value. It's just, oh, more stuff. And let's say if, not the right level of polish or other things aren't there, the content's not going to dictate the value. It's, but what is that value, and understanding what it means to players? Because that's one of the best ways you can validate, and you provide lots of examples. And then the other thing, I love this one. I think this is a good, like, overall general idea that people can probably lead with when they're getting into the pricing of their games too, is like, get it to where pricing doesn't come, or, sorry, I'm transpose this wrong, but it means like, where pricing isn't part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Right. It's irrelevant. Right. And I've seen this happen. I've done analysis and stuff on other games where I'm going through all the reviews and everything else. And the only time pricing comes up was like, this is a great price because it gets so much value. And those aren't that common, because most people are just talking about, I love this and this and this. And it's like, and the game is getting all overwhelmingly positive. And even in negative reviews, they're still calling out to the things that the game does great. But in those instances, it's funny that the pricing aspect is very nominal, or it doesn't occur that much. It's because of there's just been so much value that it becomes irrelevant. So I love that point you made too. And probably, something that people can strive to is getting to a point where pricing is irrelevant. Now, it's probably a bigger question, bigger problem to solve, but if with that framework and working towards that, I think it could do a lot of other things. And I know we don't necessarily have time, but one thing I want to call out too, that you were calling out before in terms of pricing and these things too, especially when it gets into your discount strategy, is being mindful of margins. Because I know sometimes when people are selling themselves short, maybe they price lower because that gives them an edge. No one should be racing to the bottom, because if you do, then like you said, there's pros and cons. You can get a lot of people, but it's all about margins. And you're looking for, let's say, long-term revenue or even potential sustainability. Those margins play in a big factor. And like you said, how they play into the discount strategy too, because if you don't give yourself enough margins, you don't give yourself enough room for other opportunities, for heavy discounts throughout the lifetime of your product, and all those other things.
Totally. So like, if we just dig into that just a little bit.
Sure.
Let's say you're selling your game for $10, to keep it simple, selling it for $10. Steam takes 30% off the top.
Yep.
Then you're probably going to have to allocate, knocking off 15 to 20% off for taxes. You have to probably knock off another 5% or so on returns. It totally depends on the game, the returns percentage, by the way. And then you probably have to knock off another, like, maybe 30, 40, maybe even 50% on the lifetime, like life cycle of the game, because of the discounting. So what are you really left with in terms of your margin per unit, right? You really have to ask yourself. So yeah, you have to be mindful of a few things when you're setting the price of your game.
Yeah. And I love that you called that out too. And we talked about that too, because even in that simple thing, there's lots of complicated stuff, because when you're talking about cut from Steam, taxes, all these other things that go into effect. Now, here's the thing. Let's say you have a success, however that's defined, but let's say commercially it's a small success, and you have another and another. But let's say you're not accounting for the bottom net revenue and accounting for all those other factors. So let's say you have bigger plans in 2 years and you're like, hey, we're going to be a publisher now, right? But you're not necessarily looking at those bottom line numbers. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh, wait, what's happening? Oh, I didn't realize these other things that are actually playing into how I run my business, how I can grow and scale and all these other things. And I mean, come on, we've seen it happen quite regularly where these things happen, and these things and a lot of other things on top of that that aren't being accounted for. And therefore, again, and we're just talking about a simple thing about margins, but that could have a big impact in the long run with whatever else that you're doing. And that's probably a time for another talk of numbers and the importance of them. But this is just one piece of it, how it can actually play such a bigger picture in what you guys do and how you build your studios, businesses, and grow from there.
Totally. And you want to build your business in a really sustainable, responsible way, right? So you have to take this stuff into account for the well-being of your team and to make sure you can continue to exist and grow even, right? Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Because, hey, I'm sure some of us have been there before. It's like we lead in with the right intent. We want to treat our colleagues coworkers or whatever fairly, our employees. But then next thing you know, something happens, and it's not until hindsight where you realize, oh, I now realize my error, but I still have to make these difficult decisions now. And
Mm.
hey, whatever we can to avoid that, then it's just going to make everybody better and stronger. So awesome stuff. All right, I know we're coming on time. Hey, Bobby, we talked about so much today. Are there any like things that you'd call out for tips, suggestions based off of our conversation today that you would like, our listeners to take away with?
So I would say to indie developers, network as much as you can, build relationships. The best way to do that is by getting out there, right? Get out there, even whether it's digitally or physically, get yourself out there, meet people. There's lots of digital game conferences you can go to where you can do it from your own bedroom, right? There's conferences, obviously, you can go to that's physical or hybrid. But the best website to go, the kind of knowledge base that I use is a website called Game Conf Guide. It's short for Game Conference Guide. So go to that website. It basically lists all of the events that are happening around the world. And it tells you the cost for the ticket, the website you need to go to, when it's happening, whether it's physical or digital only, which country it's happening in, blah, blah, blah. So you can plan your entire year from your own bedroom by going to Game Conf Guide. So go there and plan your event schedule and network as much as you can. People often ask me like, hey, Bobby, like, when should I start pitching? I'm like, start pitching now. Like, just like maybe you're not even pitching. Maybe you're just like getting out there and just meeting people and saying, hey, I just wanted to meet and be on your radar. I just wanted to get to know you, right? Just build a network. Build a network of friendly people in the industry that you would love to work with. So once you're ready to actually pitch, you've already got that relationship. You've got their email address. They know you by name, and you've got that relationship, right? So gameconferenceguide.com, go there. It's actually gameconfguide.com. But if you Google Game Conference Guide,
Well, we'll throw it in the show
find it.
notes regardless, so you'll
Yeah.
have that. And I've used that before, folks, too. It's amazing. It's probably one of the most comprehensive sources out there. And I think, sorry, Bobby, you didn't do it justice because there's so many other cool things that you can
Yeah.
filter and stuff in there too. But
Exactly.
the point is, he's making an excellent recommendation for that resource. It will be in the show notes.
Yeah. So network, go to that website, book out lots of stuff for the year in 2025. And then maybe another thing I would say to people is like, do your homework, right? Become that subject matter expert. And when I say do your homework, it's like, yeah, play the games that's neighboring your game that you're working on. It's very obvious, but really play them, talk about it with the team, maybe even have like a Friday afternoon as the day we play games together. We're like, it's like study club, but actually we're just playing games, right? That could be a really cool way of building culture in the team and at the same time building the kind of knowledge that you really need. And it doesn't necessarily just come down to playing games, but it's also understanding the commercial side of how those games have performed. So I mentioned these sites earlier, but like VG Insights, Gamealytic, there's a lot of these sites where you can go to see the performance of these games on Steam. And while they're estimates, they're actually really good, credible estimates. So, you can, I wouldn't say it's gospel, but it's definitely better than any kind of guess that anyone would make. They're really, really good knowledge bases. So use them and kind of start to understand how those games are performing, what price point were they at, and keep track on how they're operating, right? Like follow them on all the social networks and see how they engage with their community, see what it is that they're doing that makes them special. Like all the super successful ones, especially, definitely do that. And that way you get like a really holistic view on what's happening in your segment of the market, not just in terms of what game have they made, but the stuff that goes around it, right? Like how are they engaging with their community? How are they promoting their game? What kind of bundles are they doing? Are they doing cross-publisher bundles like with other games in the same segment? Like there's lots of aspects of how they engage with their community and increase revenue. So, at the end of the day, we're in the business of games, so we have to do this stuff. It's really, really important.
Oh, so many great tips there and everything else. And yeah, folks, do your homework, become that subject expert and everything else. Bobby, I can't thank you enough for these tips, but more importantly, just your time and the insight and really diving deep on some of these subjects, because let's face it. I mean, we all have lots going on, and sometimes we can get overwhelmed or tunnel vision or just forget about some of these things. So it's great to hear you outline these things and dive in a little bit deeper for our listeners today. And, for people that want to connect, reach out, what are some links or ways that people can, reach out to you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew. This has been really great. Hopefully there was a couple of tips in there that might have been useful for people. I have a tendency of waffling forever. So
It's all good.
waffling.
It's still great stuff. It doesn't matter as long as it's good stuff, in which it was great stuff. So you checked off the box. You're good.
Thank you very much.
But but for people, are you on social media or your website, or what a way people can connect?
Yeah, sorry, yes. So please go to candofactory.com. That's the Cando Factory website. It's currently being assembled. It will be up fully by the new year for sure. And it will continue to evolve over the course of 2025, no doubt. And I want that to become like a hub where there's, it's not just a website that's kind of telling who we are, but I want it to become like a social hub where people like indie developers can come and see really valuable resources and become a place where they can engage with other developers eventually. So while that's not happening yet, that's the plan. So please go to candofactory.com and save that bookmark somewhere.
Okay, cool. And, if people want to follow you, you're on LinkedIn, right?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on X and whatnot.
Awesome.
But yeah, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn.
All right, excellent. So, folks, you want to connect, reach out. It will be in the show notes. And again, Bobby, thank you so much for today. It's been a pleasure and honor to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.